Hey guys, welcome to the second part of these Bitcoin Cash wallet tutorial. In this video, we'll be laying out the different parts of our future wallet, and then we'll be fully implementing a very basic yet functional UI. By the end of this video, we'll have completed our wallet's UI and we'll be ready to start writing some actual code in part 3. So that's it for the intro, and let's jump right into it. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open the editor here where we left off in part 1. This is the index.html file that we created on the previous part. I'm going to make sure that I'm running here yarn dev on this directory. And then I'm going to refresh the page to see where we left off. So this is where we left off on part 1. And we're actually going to start thinking about what are the sections that our wallet is going to have. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to erase this hello world. And I'm going to start adding a few sections here to the HTML. In total, we're going to have 4 sections, where the first section is going to be the balance section. That means this is the area of the UI where we're going to display how much money our wallet has, and essentially just the funds that we have deposited in our wallet. Then section number 2, the second section, is going to be the part where we actually display the deposit address. This is the address where you need to send funds to actually add money to your wallet. Now, the third section we're going to add here is the section where you can actually create withdrawals or send money. I'm going to call this section the withdrawal section. And then the last section is going to be the import-export section, which is where we're going to be able to see a string backup of our wallet. And also we'll be able to import here a backup from a different wallet that we want to restore either on this device or on a different one. So first step, I'm going to make all of these into headers. And now we're going to start thinking about what each of these sections is going to have. Now, the balance section, first of all, just needs to have essentially just a placeholder for data, where we're actually gonna later on we're gonna fetch the wallet's balance, and we're actually gonna display it here. So I'm just gonna add a span here, which is gonna be empty for now, but that's where the actual number is going to be there. Now, first of all, just to make things easier for this wallet, we're just gonna display the balance in Satoshis, which is 100th millionth of a Bitcoin Cash. So I'm just going to add the unit here. This is the most basic unit, the smallest amount of money that you can consider when talking about Bitcoin Cash. This is the same with Bitcoin. In the case of the deposit address, this is also just going to be a placeholder for data, because we will be displaying right here the Bitcoin Cash address where you need to send funds to actually create a deposit. This is also going to be empty. So these two are actually going to get filled as soon as our wallet starts. So I'm just going to add here a little placeholder saying that there's actually something here that is loading, and it will essentially be later replaced by the actual data. Now, the third section, the withdrawal section, is actually going to be a bit more complicated, because you actually need a form for this. You need to create a form where the user can choose which address they want to send money to, and also what amount. So I'm going to start off writing a form. And inside of this form, we're going to have 2 inputs, essentially for those 2 things that I just described. The first input is going to be of type text. And this is going to be the name of the field. It's going to be withdrawal address, because this is the address where you want to send the money. The second input is going to be of type number, and this is going to be the withdrawal amount. This again is in Satoshis. Now I'm also going to add a couple of placeholders here to make it obvious what these fields are. And the withdrawal form, of course, also needs a submit button so that the user can click there when they actually want to perform the action. The verb we're going to use here is just withdraw. Withdraw. And I think that's it for the withdrawal section. Now, moving on to the fourth section, import and export. This section is a bit more complicated. It has two different things. The first thing that it has is also a form, which is where the user will be able to submit a backup of a different wallet and actually import it. So for this, we're going to add another text field down here. That is, this is going to be a private key, and the placeholder as well, private key. And we also need a submit button here, which is going to be verb's going to be import, since that's what we'll be doing. And last, in the export section, we're going to add the part where we actually allow the user to see their the backup of their wallet. So I'm going to add a div here to group these two things together. The first thing I'm going to put here is a button. The reason for this is I'm going to add a button here that says show and hide. The idea is that you don't want to be displaying the private key all the time, because whenever the user has the wallet open in a tab, anyone passing by can look into their screen and see their private key. So the way you do that is you just default to showing just a hidden version of the private key, and then when the user actually wants to see it, to write it down somewhere, they can click on the show hide button to actually display it. So again, this is just a placeholder for future data, which by default starts off looking hidden. So I'm going to refresh the page to see how all of this looks. And there we have it. This is the first version of our UI. So if you can see here, there's it's not really neat. There's quite a few rough edges. So I'm gonna add just a tiny amount of CSS to make everything look a little bit better. I'm gonna just come here, style. So I just want to change a couple things. The first thing I want to change is the height of the inputs. I want both of these two inputs here to be of the same height. So I'm gonna write here input, and I'm gonna set the height to let's say 35 pixels. Now I also want to do the same with the buttons. I want them to have the same height as the inputs, so that they align visually very well when they're next to each other, like here in the import and withdraw buttons. So I also want to change the font. I don't really like the default font all that much, so for every element out there, I'm just going to change the font family. I'm going to set it to, let's say, Arial. Let's refresh. Okay, so this is all the CSS I'm going to add. This is like a very basic UI, but it's all that we're actually going to need to implement our wallet. Before moving forward, all of these HTML tags, we're going to need to reference them from our JavaScript code later. So I'm going to start adding IDs to many of these things so that we can actually retrieve them from JavaScript and do some operations on them later. So I'm going to start off by calling this one the balance display, because this is where we're going to display the balance. Here, down here, this is going to be the deposit address display. And next are the forms. I'm going to call this form right here. This is going to be the withdrawal form. And the one there on the button is going to be the import form. So we also need to add IDs to the span down here, because this is where we're going to actually add the data later. So it's going to be the private key display, and the show and hide button. So the two buttons we draw and import are actually part of a form, so you can process those buttons without actually having to add an ID to them. But this one down here isn't really a form, so I'm just gonna add an ID as well, so that later on we can actually reference this from JavaScript. So I'm gonna call this one the export button, and I'm just gonna make sure I'm not leaving out any IDs on any HTML element that we're actually gonna have to operate on later. So just one final look, everything looks accounted for, so that seems complete. Let me refresh the page. This is the whole UI. We're not going to be building any more UI elements, and that is it for part 2 then. Everything is ready now to actually start writing some JavaScript code, since we won't really be editing the index.html file anymore. So see you on part 3 then.